wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Thursday edition here at Point of View, and we are going to be covering quite a bit over the next couple of hours. We'll be, first of all, talking with our friend Konni Burton about the Texan and an event that will be taking place in September that later this month that you might want to know more about. Then we'll get into a very significant breakthrough in terms of treating COVID-19. So we'll talk about that and what the World Health Organization has discovered and a couple other aspects of that. Later on, we're going to get into Black Lives Matter, some new revelation about what many of the founders of the movement actually believe. And we've posted a couple of articles in that regard. We also, next hour, will be talking about charitable giving during the wake of COVID-19. Then in the last hour, we'll have Michael Knowles with us. Michael Knowles' show was just really well done, and I just thought we might introduce him to you. And then a book interview before we're all done, Dorothy and Jack. It's all about C.S. Lewis and Dorothy Sayers. So we'll get into some issues related to writing and theology and apologetics and much, much more. Konni Burton with us. She is the founder and CEO of the Texan, and it is a way in which you can find out a lot more about Texas news unfiltered in a way that you perhaps need to know about. She has served in the past, of course, as a senator in Senate District number 10 and joins us now by phone. So, Konni, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, thank you so much, Kerby, for having me on. It's always a joy to be with you.
Let's talk about a few of the articles. One that we've been paying attention to is down there in Harris County. Plan to send out 2.3 million mail ballot applications. But the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, said, whoa, wait a minute, you can't do that. And all sorts of people starting to have big questions about mail-in ballots, about election security and the rest. And I know you and some of the reporters have been talking about this issue. Tell us more.
Yes, absolutely. We have Holly Hansen in Harris County, and she has been steeped in Harris County politics for many, many years. As a matter of fact, I can't tell you how many compliments we get on her. She reports, about so many issues going on. There's quite a bit in Harris County, but this is the latest. And she just came out. We just put another article on our website about the Texas Supreme Court temporarily halts Harris County mail-in ballot plan because, what is happening there is Harris County just decided that they were going to send mail-in ballots to each and every voter in Harris County, which, of course, not only is, from the Attorney General's perspective, not something that they should be allowed to do, but costs a phenomenal amount of taxpayer dollars to get done. And so there's a lot of lawsuits flying on this. It's quite the discussion in Harris County. And here's the deal. What I love about what we write about at the Texan is, while this is very centered on Harris County, this is something we all need to be paying attention to because we don't know whether our local county is all of a sudden going to decide to do this kind of thing. And so, while sometimes I think, I worry that people don't read a particular article because maybe it has to do with, Bexar County or Travis County, and yet we all really need to stay on top of these issues because, as you've probably seen, Kerby, we've got a lot of issues across the state at the local level that many people are not paying attention to, and it matters at the ballot box.
Let me just mention then, just in a few minutes, we're going to talk about an event taking place later this month, September 26th. So if people might want to get out their calendar, because I think they will want to attend that. And while we're talking about this, just before we move on, because some of the other articles are about tax revenue and a variety of other issues, when people say, well, what's wrong with mail-in ballots? All I simply do, Connie, is say, okay, let's just go to a few of the most recent elections where we had mail-in ballots. And one of those is in New Jersey, third largest city in New Jersey, Patterson, which was so tainted they decided to have to actually do a mulligan and do it all over again, because they eventually concluded that nearly 25% of the ballots that came in actually were tainted. Either they didn't have the accurate signature, they didn't have the right postage, they didn't have something wrong with them. And so as a result, they just have to actually do an entire election again on November 3rd. But you might say, well, that's just a city council election. Okay, let's go to a congressional election. That would be the 12th congressional district in New York, which again probably should be redone. But lawsuits all over the place. By the way, these are both Democratic races, by the way. So you can't say, well, this was, Republicans fiddling with it or something like that. And they had to wait almost 2 months where finally a judge, kind of like King Solomon, finally just issues his sword and said, no, the incumbent wins and let's go on. So if that happens in a congressional race, if that happens in a city council race, and of course, those are just two examples I can pick out of the top of the hat, you could see what could happen here in the state of Texas, can't you?
Absolutely. And here's the issue. We have to depend on election integrity, right? I mean, our system, we have to believe that who is voting is actually a registered voter. It cheats those who have voted in the name of somebody else that then, may not get the chance to vote or frankly chooses not to, because that's their decision, right? But everybody has to believe in our system, and these kinds of election fraud issues that can surface out of this is I can't even imagine it at the state, level or national level, what it can do to our elections.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We got a break coming up in about 2 minutes, but I think you can cover it in 2 minutes because you have an event taking place September 26th. That is Saturday. It's at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport Marriott, and it's a night with the Babylon Bee. Now, we've enjoyed some of the interaction we've had with one of the writers of Babylon Bee, but you've got kind of the who's who of the Babylon Bee, and I think anybody that's enjoyed some of their satire would enjoy going to your event. So tell us more.
Oh, I appreciate you bringing that up, Kerby, so much. We're so excited. We're going to have an evening, as you mentioned, in DFW Marriott. So it's very centrally located. So those from Dallas or Fort Worth or thereabout, all around can come and join us. But we have Seth Dillon, who is the CEO of the Babylon Bee. So he's the head honcho, and we reached out to him. Obviously, you must be familiar with the Babylon Bee. All of us at the Texan are, and we just absolutely love them. They are a satire site. And it's becoming quite amazing these days because their satire is almost reality. Their headlines almost match what the corporate media headlines are. I think most of your listeners, I know most of our readers, believe that we have a media problem in this country and, unfortunately, in Texas as well. And so what the Babylon Bee does is they make fun of the media and ourselves and politics. It's a no-holds-bar satire site. And we just giggle when we read their headlines, and they're very quick snippet stories that go with it. And so the event is called The Texan Presents the Babylon Bee When Satire Becomes Reality. And we're going to sit down and we're going to have a discussion with him, along with Stephen Krakauer, who is a media watchdog newsletter writer. And so he's going to be with us as well.
So, again, we're going to take a break. Again, there's information about that. I think we have it on our website. You can certainly find it there. And when we come back, we'll talk about some of the declining revenue for the state of Texas. And we did talk about media bias. We'll talk about that in the Texas media right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Recently, one of my guests on my radio program told me about a poll that discovered that words like safety and security were being frequently mentioned as a reason to vote for a particular candidate. Key issues in any political campaign include the economy and social issues. Now the word security surfaced in many political polls. Mark Lauder believes the election will come down to this word security in three different ways. First is economic security. Donald Trump opposed NAFTA and TPP, while Joe Biden supported those treaties. President Trump has cut taxes, while former Vice President Biden proposed programs that the Tax Foundation estimated would cost about $4 trillion over 10 years. Domestic security has also become a big issue. Every night it seems we see more images of American cities burning as rioters and looters destroy property and attack police and average citizens. Most of these cities are run by Democrats. Many of the police departments are run by competent black police chiefs, but the riots and property damage continue. Speakers at the Democratic National Convention ignored the violence and property destruction. Many of the speakers at the Republican National Convention noted the riots and looting. The two parties almost seem to come down on different sides. Security from foreign enemies is the third factor. President Trump has pushed to rebuild the military, along with striving to end America's involvement in what he has called senseless wars. Democratic leaders want to reduce military spending. Senator Bernie Sanders has put forth a proposal that would reduce Pentagon spending by $74 billion. The Democratic Party platform also calls for ending what it calls forever wars. Security seems to be an important election issue. As you can see, there are striking differences between the candidates and parties on security issues. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Konni Burton with us for a few more minutes as we talk about the Texan. And if you would like to know more about that, we have a link on the website. And I thought we might, since we did talk about the media just a minute ago, some people might say, well, why do I need a statewide news outlet? Because sometimes those individuals that covered you when you were in the Texas Senate and cover you in some of the campaigns don't always give the entire story. And you've got some articles that have come out on about the Texas media reveals their groupthink. You also pointed out, and I did not know this till I read this, that the paycheck or the payroll protection program, the PPP, the payroll protection program, which a number of nonprofits have used and churches have used, also were used to cover some of these people in the media. So give us an idea of what's going on in terms of what's happening to your so-called competition out there.
Yeah, it was very enlightening. There's one state-level news outlet called the Texas Tribune who's been in existence, I guess, for about 10 years now. And they will tell you that they are, a non-biased news site and that nothing could be further from the truth. They are definitely push a narrative, definitely, spin articles from the left of center perspective. And it was interesting. We found out they are a nonprofit. And by the way, all news media sites were deemed essential by the governor. So there was no shutdown of media during the shutdown. And yet they applied for a PPP loan and received, I believe it was a little over $1 million or just up to $1 million in taxpayer dollars. And so, what I'm very proud of the Texan about is, my husband and I started this. We have funded it just like any business. You put your own money into it, your blood, sweat, and tears into it. And we are a subscription-based site. We don't rely on the government in any way, shape, or form. We don't take advertising dollars. We don't take donor dollars. We are a subscription-based site because we are loyal only to our readers. That's who we are selling our product to, and we're giving them straight news. We're not pushing an agenda. We're not pushing a narrative. We're just giving them straight news. And what I love about the Texan is you and I could both read an article, and we can come away with different thoughts on how we feel about what we read within that article because we're just giving you the facts. And, that's what I was so frustrated with as an activist, as somebody running for office, and then somebody in office. It was all very frustrating because I always saw the spin that they put on things. So I would encourage everybody to go to the Texan.news, that's our URL, and take a look at our articles. And I hope they'll subscribe because I think that they'll find that, factual, straight news is worth paying for. And it's not that much. And, we certainly want to grow and continue to give people the information that they need to make them more educated at the ballot box. And Kerby, if I could, one of the things I forgot to mention, and this may be the URLs that you have on your site, but I want to be sure, since we talked about the Babylon Bee event already, that anybody can go to the Texan.news/events.
Okay,
That's
good.
our URL for that. So
very good. Les, while we're talking about media, before I get into some other issues, you also talked about how the media reveals their groupthink, and that has to do with, and of course, this was back in May, but I think you still remember the article, because I thought it was so good because we have been covering the pandemic, the lockdown, and all of the rest. But anybody that thinks that everybody is speaking without looking at what people next to them are writing about, it's almost like there's a memo goes out and everybody writes the same story, and it's the same one again and again and again. And I think the example you provide there shows the tremendous amount of groupthink even in the Texas media.
Yes, it's quite incredible. And I say this to a lot of people that I see when I'm out on the road, that particularly now that I'm in this industry, I mean, it's something that we all know on a surface level, I believe, but now that I'm in this industry and we pay very close attention to what the other media organizations are writing about, it's phenomenal how they are all very much the same headlines, the same type of articles. And I again, truly believe, I don't think that there's any vast conspiracy as much as I believe, and frankly, we have the statistics to show it, is that these media people that are editors, that are writers, that own these operations, they are all left of center. So they report from that perspective. The number of cases, right, of coronavirus is what they write about, as if that's the most horrific statistic. That's not. There are many others, hospital beds, all the, not only cases, but how many are actually in the hospital, and have they come through it? Are they, how many have survived the coronavirus? We give that information all encompassing, right? So you can't just decide something on one statistic, but they are in this kind of alarmist kind of reporting. And so that's how they produce their articles. But we, on the other hand, want to give you the whole picture so that you can make a decision on whether, is this something I should be alarmed about or is it not? Instead of being told, oh, this is how many cases we have today, therefore you need to be alarmed. I think the media is very much set on, trying to keep people in a state of worry and concern, and when we don't need to be. We just need to have information so we can filter that ourselves and make our own decisions.
Again, the Texan.news/events with an S, and they'll find it there. Just before we go, though, I wanted to mention one other one, and that is one of your articles about the tax revenues down dramatically. No surprise because of the lockdowns, but that is going to be a big issue in the next legislative session. And having served in the Texas Senate, you can realize that there will be all sorts of people that maybe were on the other side of the aisle that will just want to raise taxes at a time when we shouldn't be raising taxes because a lot of people are out of a job. So this is going to be a big issue, don't you think?
Absolutely. Oh, my gosh, absolutely. And I'm very worried. Obviously, the budget is the main reason for the session every 2 years. And I'm incredibly worried, particularly because last session, they, in my mind, spent like drunken sailors. And yet we had a Republican majority. I was very concerned with the budget that was passed last session. And, these are the reasons why, when I was in elected office, I was bound and determined that we do not spend the rainy day fund because you never know what's ahead of you. And who would have ever guessed we would have this coronavirus pandemic, shut down the economy? It's why you must not allow these elected officials to just spend, because times are good right now. And so, they spent a lot of money out of the rainy day fund last session, and now, we're going to go in very much hurting in this session. And it's not only Democrats who want to raise taxes that I'm worried about. It's Republicans as well, because, it doesn't seem like they want to cut spending. They only want to increase taxes to cover the spending. And people need to be paying attention when the session comes around in January, and we will be writing a lot about that as we move through the session to keep people informed and what it looks like is going to happen.
Again, I love your comment. Spending like drunken sailors, with all apologies to those of you that served in the Navy. This is just pathetic.
When I said that, I thought, maybe I shouldn't have.
No, we haven't used that phrase in a long time. And with apologies to any of you that did serve honorably in the Navy. But nevertheless, just before we go, one last time, I'm hoping a couple of our staff will be there with you on September 26th. And if you would like to know a little bit more about the Babylon Bee, again, the Texan.news/events. And if you've heard us quote from the Babylon Bee, if you've gone on our Facebook page where we post some of those, again, when sometimes satire becomes reality. I think they've identified at least 10 different stories that they did as satire that actually became real news. So much so that people are doing fact checks on them because they're saying this is ridiculous. So, Konni, it's always great to have you on the program. And I would encourage people to subscribe to the Texan. As you well know, I have subscribed and receive it and benefit from it. So I'm not asking you to do something I haven't done myself. So always great to have you on the program.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kerby. I appreciate it very much.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, let's get into a couple of those issues. We have the World Health Organization, I think we can trust them this time, pointing out that there are some breakthroughs that are helpful in treating COVID-19, so we'll get into that. Back to school. Well, the schools here in Texas are actually convening, and then you go up to places which are pretty much dominated by Democrats. Even Rhode Island are saying, yep, going back to school. Governor's fighting the teachers union saying, we're going to school, and we don't care what you happen to say about it. So we'll get into some of those stories right after these important messages.
(2020). It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
During this time, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to be jumping around on a variety of different topics, but one of those I thought we'd start with is we are starting to see some very significant breakthroughs in treatment for COVID-19. And we've mentioned some of those before. This most recent breakthrough was announced by the World Health Organization, and since it was not announced by Donald Trump, maybe people will actually implement it. Okay, I had to get that out of the way at least because because you know only so well that almost at the moment the president talks about some particular treatment, whether it is hydroxychloroquine or whether it's the use of plasma, then everybody starts criticizing it simply because this is sort of the reflex reaction. But this one comes from the World Health Organization. I know some of you have kind of a bias against them, but after all, they are scientists and there are doctors, and they can actually look at the test. And interestingly enough, this one's pretty straightforward. I'll just read from this article by Jack Davis. Cutting the death toll from COVID-19 could be as simple as giving steroids to the most serious cases, according to a new study from the World Health Organization. Here's the direct quote, "We recommend systemic corticosteroids," those are a typical kind of class of steroids, rather than no systemic corticosteroids for the treatment of patients with severe and critical COVID-19. They also say this is a strong recommendation based on moderate certainty evidence. And so that's part of the revised guidelines that the World Health Organization has been sending out on giving steroids. They also cautioned, and I'll quote this, "We suggest not to use corticosteroids in the treatment of patients with non-severe COVID-19. So they've pretty much made it clear what that might be. What they found is that there was reduction of mortality of anywhere from 8% to 6% in some of those individuals who were critically and severely ill. So that was interesting, and I've kind of rounded the numbers off, but you can go find the article if you are interested in that, or you know somebody that maybe is in intensive care right now, and I would assume most doctors are familiar with this. After all, because it appeared, for example, in the Journal of the American Medical Association. It also appeared in an article in the New York Times. Dr. Howard Bochner, I think is how you pronounce his name, he's the editor-in-chief of the Journal of the American Medical Association, said clearly now steroids are the standard of care. Then you had some other individuals, one who is a professor of medicine at Vanderbilt. This would be Dr. Todd Rice. I think there is some uncertainty about whether the effect was real. This shows us steroids are clearly beneficial in this population and should be clearly given unless you absolutely can't for some reason, which needs to be a pretty rare occasion. One of the studies, interesting enough, involved a couple of things that we've talked about before. One of the studies used hydrocortisone, which was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, with a treatment of a 7-day fixed dose course of hydroxycortisone, as well as dosing of hydroxycortisone and a variety of others. And there you had, interestingly enough, anywhere from 80% to 93% probability of superiority. So kind of interesting. And of course, you have all sorts of other kinds of treatments that I won't get into. Some of these are almost unpronounceable words, and I'm not sure how well I did with some of the words we have there, but nevertheless, it just is, again, another breakthrough and a significant one. So this one is being promoted by the World Health Organization, and I thought we might pass that on as well. Let's get back to the schools. Of course, most of you listening in the state of Texas, but not exclusively. And if you are, you recognize that a lot of kids went back to school even today. In Allen, for example, I noticed that in the independent school district there. But that has not been happening so much in some of the blue states. But I think, as this particular article in the Wall Street Journal points out, Rhode Island is now showing you how you can reopen the schools. The governor there is a woman, and she actually has been working really hard to try to get these schools open. And it is kind of interesting because at first you were hearing, we need to keep them closed down. And then just the other day, you had the former Vice President Joe Biden criticize President Trump for not opening the public schools. Now, you've got to recognize how sometimes a progressive can pivot on a dime, because just a few days ago, the liberal progressive wings were pretty much saying we need to keep the schools closed. And then all of a sudden, Joe Biden says we need to actually criticize President Trump because, again, I'll just quote Joe Biden. You can hear from himself. "Let me be clear. If President Trump and his administration had done their jobs, America's schools would be open. Instead, America's families are paying the price for his failures. So all of a sudden the signal goes out, it's time to open the schools. And I think at least one person that got the memo was the governor of Rhode Island. And so, again, the issue was not that parents didn't want the schools open. It isn't that the students didn't want the schools open. The issue sometimes wasn't even that the teachers didn't want the schools open. The issue was, and as it says here, the main obstacle to reopening the schools isn't the virus, it's the teachers' union. The virus has been under control in New York City for months, yet the teachers' union this week threatened a strike unless classroom instruction was delayed. So, of course, obediently, the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, surrendered. And even though state law prohibits teachers from striking, that simply was enough. And then, of course, you have other people like Joe Biden now saying that schools could open. But then you have others like the union saying the schools can't open safely. So here we go back to Rhode Island, where the governor announced Monday that all school districts, with the exception maybe of Providence and Central Falls, which have had more virus cases, were cleared to begin full in-person instruction on September 14th, which, of course, is just actually 2 weeks from Labor Day. But nevertheless, that is taking the case. The teachers' unions, as usual, are objecting to the reopening, but the governor warned that districts that don't reopen for in-person learning might face lawsuits from parents or lose federal funds. Pretty interesting. But again, this editorial says, by contrast, of course, you see California's Democratic legislature this summer shielded public schools that lose students amid the pandemic from also losing per-student funding. In other words, we'll keep paying you even when the students aren't in school, which is amazing to me. Okay, and this week, the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is keeping schools closed, reported that student enrollment has dropped this year from 12,000, including some 6,000 kindergartners. So a lot of parents are saying, okay, we just won't go to the schools. We'll do something else. Maybe they will go and find other options. They might go to the private schools, charter schools, whatever. But it brings me back to a commentary that you might want to get. Before this hour is over, I'll mention my commentary today. But I had a commentary that came out August 13th, in which I was sort of asking the question, shouldn't we consider teachers as essential workers? I mean, after all, we've designated police officers and firefighters, doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals as essential workers. Essentially, we've designated grocery workers, delivery drivers, food processors, truck drivers as essential workers. We just mentioned Konni Burton. The media are considered essential workers. And so these are individuals that each day face some potential risks. But they do that with the recognition that they could catch the coronavirus, but they're taking the level of safety precautions that they can. And quite frankly, I think we owe an incredible debt of gratitude to those individuals. By contrast, though, as you well know, you've had many of these teachers' unions that have wanted to close down. And that is flying in the face of what the American Academy of Pediatrics actually said, in which these pediatricians said the goal of having students physically present in the schools this fall is essential. The New England Journal of Medicine, again, a very reputable journal, warned that children living in poverty, children of color, English language learners, children with diagnosed disabilities, and young children face especially severe losses. And so, again, we recognize there may be some that could be considered vulnerable on the part of teachers. But again, the latest survey shows maybe only about 17% over the age of 55. By the time you get to those over the age of 60 or 65, almost none. So this has been done effectively in Europe. It's been done effectively in Australia. Yesterday, I mentioned even how it's been done in Sweden in particular. And so, if nothing else, I think it's about time to simply say, and we give an attaboy to the governor of Rhode Island, who in a blue state was willing to fight a little bit the teachers' unions to get the kids back in school. And so my commentary on August 13 is about the teachers. Also have one that deals with the teachers' unions. And you can read those if you'd like. break. And when we come back, I want to get into a couple of other issues. We've learned some disturbing things about how the State Department monitored America's social media. Relates a little bit to some of the conversation we had the other day with Carter Page. So we'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, there's been an investigation on the kind of spying that took place on the Trump campaign and the Trump administration. And just this week, we've had Carter Page on. In the past, we've had George Papadopoulos on. We've had a number of individuals that have addressed that issue. But something else surfaced, and this comes from our friends at Judicial Watch. It's been a while since we've had them on. And because of this Freedom of Information lawsuit, we found that there was some spying that was actually taking place, not through the FBI, not through the Justice Department, not through the Intelligence Committee and Commission and community, I guess is probably a better word to say. The State Department was actually monitoring the social media of certain individuals. And as this article points out, it's almost like you had under the previous administration, that would be the Barack Obama administration, an enemies list. And so the State Department apparently ordered employees to monitor the social media accounts of prominent Americans during the early days of the Ukraine scandal, which happened, of course, in 2019. And so you can find this now in the memos from the State Department, which were surfaced because of this lawsuit brought by the government watchdog Judicial Watch. By the way, that's another organization I support. I'm not asking you to support them, but I do. And let's go through the names of the people being monitored by the State Department. Well, first of all, that would be Donald Trump Jr., that would be the former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. It would be all the Fox News hosts. That would be Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, as well as the Fox business host, Lou Dobbs. And then it would also be people like John Solomon, who's been on the program here of the Just the News. And so you're talking about this monitoring and surveilling of individuals' social media. Now, you could say, well, anybody could possibly be doing that because, I could subscribe to the various social media accounts. That would be Facebook and Twitter, whatever it might be, and I could simply watch that. But again, look at who was targeted by what? The State Department. And I think it's pretty interesting. And emails also show that the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine at the time, that would be Marie Yankelovich. You might remember her from the testimony that was used to justify the impeachment of Donald Trump, as well as George Kent, who was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. They were all told about the program. Now, if they were told about the program, you would expect them at some point, if they had a level of propriety, to say, wait a minute, we were not supposed to be doing that. More importantly, if there's a memo out there, go destroy this because this is not going to look good if it ever gets out that we are then doing selective monitoring of some of these individuals. And again, like I said, these are individuals that you could monitor. I'm not saying that you have violated a law necessarily, but it just, again, shows the selectivity of the kind of monitoring that was taking place. And it's interesting that one of the memos said the subjects that were targeted included social media posts involving the ambassador, also some of the others that were part of this. And, of course, it all has to do with the controversy surrounding Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and Burisma Holdings and a number of other things. And it just, I think, illustrates, again, the kind of surveillance that was taking place in the past. Will there be anybody drawn up on charges on this? I sincerely doubt it for lots of reasons, not the least of which it may not necessarily violate any laws. But it does tell you a great deal about the way in which the State Department address some of these issues as well. Let me bring up a couple of other issues before we take a break here. One of those I mentioned yesterday just in passing, but I think it's worth coming back to. And this is written by Joe LeConte. Joseph LeConte actually teaches at King's College. I think we have somebody around here whose daughter goes to King's College, right? There's my producer. And anyway, and we've had Joe on here before, and Joe wrote this very good piece. And I'm only going to summarize it because it goes on for 2 pages, but I'll just read the first few paragraphs to give you the idea. He says, when D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, who is the mayor of the District of Columbia, earlier this year created an advisory group to scrutinize the city's monuments, memorials, and facilities for their disqualifying histories. That's a direct quote. The outcome of its feverish deliberations were utterly predictable, Joe LeConte says. It would launch an assault on the most cherished and unifying symbols of American democracy. So earlier this year, there was a commission, it's an advisory group, to go and look at some of the monuments in the District of Columbia. Which, by the way, does the mayor have authority to take any of those down? No. As a matter of fact, the Secretary of Interior the other day made it very clear none of them are coming down, but some of the vigilantes may use this as a justification for tearing them down. And the list is the same list you've seen before. Christopher Columbus, Benjamin Franklin, Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson, George Mason, George Washington, all swept up in what Joe LeConte calls this frenzied attempt to cleanse the land of anyone linked to slavery, systematic racism, or the mistreatment of women or the LGBTQ communities. Okay? And so then he goes on to say, yes, the Washington Monument, towering over the city to honor the man considered first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen, makes the list of offenders. Now, of course, the other issue is that the District of Columbia's Facilities and Commemorative Expressions Committee is also recommending that the federal government remove, relocate, or contextualize, are you ready for this? 1,300 assets. That would be statues, public schools, libraries, parks, and roads. And so, again, this is a part of this committee to address these issues. Now, it isn't probably going to go too far, but it is, I think, striking that when you put together an advisory group, they are quite willing, if they had the authority, and maybe they think they do, and maybe they'll do it, and then ask for forgiveness, since they certainly can't get permission, to tear down some of these. But even the Washington Monument itself is not exempt from this, and it is a head shaker. This goes on, by the way, for actually 2 pages, and I just read 3 paragraphs from it. So if you want to go find that, it is entitled The Mayor, the Monuments, and the Mayhem. Joe LeConte, who's been on the program with us. Maybe we'll get him on the program sometime in the future and talk about that. But just before we take a break, let's mention that my commentary today is on the subject of security. One of our guests a while back said that there was a poll that discovered that words like safety and security are showing up in a lot of these focus groups and a lot of these polls. And so Mark Lauder actually says that he believes the election will come down to this word security, and talks about it in 3 different ways. One, economic security, the difference between, say, President Trump on NAFTA and TPP and Joe Biden, as well as, you know, the whole issue of the destruction of these cities. So that's kind of the economic issue, which leads into the second one, of course, and that is the concern about domestic security. When you see so many people that are now losing their livelihood, businesses being burned down, when you have sometimes these rioters and protesters going into the suburbs, that's becoming more scary. And that's why you're having quite a number of these police groups actually endorsing Donald Trump, some of which have historically endorsed Joe Biden. And then also security is a third factor, and that has to do security from foreign enemies. And when you, again, look at the fact that Senator Bernie Sanders put forward a proposal to reduce the Pentagon spending by $74 billion, if that was implemented under a Biden-Harris regime, I think some people might be concerned about that. So the word security is showing up, and if you'd like to read the entire Viewpoints commentary, it's at our website, pointofview.net. We'll come back and talk about some of the articles I posted on the website, and then talk with some of our guests right after these important messages.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees, and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Thursday edition here of Point of View. And over the next half hour, I want to try to cover a couple of very key issues, and they are illustrated by some of the articles that we've posted here. One, A Clutch of Fools, and I'll get into a couple of others just in just a few minutes that we will be talking about as well. One on Black Lives Matter movement, which is different than the idea of Black Lives Matter. And we'll get into that in just a minute. Also, I just might mention just in passing something I have talked about before, and that is the World Health Organization now says that we have quite a breakthrough in terms of treating people with COVID-19, especially if they are in some kind of distress. In other words, for people that are facing some kind of severe or critical case of COVID-19, turns out that using steroids rather dramatically cuts the death rate. So that's just something I thought I'd mention in passing. We really won't get into. And then we're going to look at this piece called The Clutch of Fools by by Kevin Williamson. We'll get into some of these others in just a minute. And then later this hour, Paul Martin will be with us. We'll talk about how has charitable giving been taking place during the pandemic. That affects you, your church, Christian organizations, Christian radio, where you're hearing this right now, and a number of others. So we'll get a little bit of a perspective on that with him. Next hour, I've been wanting to get Michael Knowles on. If you're not familiar with the Michael Knowles Show, that'll give you a chance to hear from a very articulate young voice. And from time to time, as we do on our Millennial Roundtable, like to give a platform for individuals that are very articulate and are speaking not just to their own generation, which they certainly are, but to all of us. And so I wanted to get your comments and give you a little bit of an understanding about him. Also, he's posted some tweets that are somewhat controversial that I think might actually be somewhat on target. So I wanted to give him a chance and a platform to talk about that. And before we end the program at 2 hours from now, Gina Dalfonzo will be on with us, I should say. And the bottom line is we'll be talking about her book, Dorothy and Jack, which actually the friendship between Dorothy Sayers and C.S. Lewis. And I think you'll enjoy that conversation. Takes us out of the news cycle, which every once in a while we really need to do. And so we'll do that for the last half hour, an hour from now. But let's, before we go any further, get to this piece by Kevin Williamson. He calls it A Clutch of Fools, the unsustainable fiction of mostly peaceful protests. If there's one thing that is starting to surface, and even if you tend to believe that there has been an overreaction to these riots, and some do, you still have to say that it's getting a little bit ridiculous when you have individuals standing in front of a burning building and then trying to tell you that we have a couple of fires, but in a mostly peaceful protest. Obviously, that doesn't work very well. Of course, you've seen some 27 law enforcement officers hurt in mostly peaceful protests. Really? I mean, that is part of it. But he's critical not only of some of the people in the media, but even of the president himself. So let me just read the piece to get you started on it. He says, reporters standing in front of scenes of arson, flames billowing behind them, not very far from scenes of shooting and murder, insist that the protests are mostly peaceful. And he says, National Public Radio and a multi-billion-dollar global media conglomerate team up to bring you an illiterate defense of looting. What he's referring to is there's this new book out now called In Defense of Looting. not making that up, which has been actually very favorably promoted within NPR. Well, we'll get to that in just a minute. And then he's critical not only of the media, but he says then the president comes to defense of a dangerously stupid teenager who went looking for trouble, illegally armed with a rifle in his hands, and to no one's surprise, found the trouble he was looking for. Now, whatever you think about this 17-year-old and whether or not he is going to be ultimately convicted of murder or homicide or self-defense, whatever it might be, I think there is a lesson we can learn, and one of those lessons is this. If you go to a riot with a gun, there are going to be people that are going to want to take the gun away from you, and there are people that are going to want to hurt you. So we can leave to the courts the deciding about what is or isn't appropriate, but I thought it was kind of interesting that he picked that fight. But actually, he goes on almost immediately to get to the point I want to make. And that is, what you keep hearing is, well, it's just property. Well, first of all, burning down homes, businesses, and other things is more than just property. But here's his argument. He says, in reality, it isn't just property. It's mobs setting fire to homes with children in them. He gives a documentation there. It's mobs shooting children to death. He gives a documentation for that as well. It is mobs shooting adults to death. It is arson that endangers the lives of innocent bystanders, firefighters, and other emergency workers. It is also, he says, a near guarantee of long-term disinvestment from communities in which property is not secure. The same people burning down grocery stores today will be complaining about food deserts in 18 months. Dr. Merrill Matthews was on with us last Friday, has a piece that just came out saying, you know, with all the things happening now, these food deserts are going to be food wastelands. And if you're not familiar with the concept of a food desert, it is there are certain zip codes where finding a grocery store within even walking distance or bicycle riding distance is very hard to do. And so those are oftentimes referred to as food deserts. Burn down that grocery store. Do you think there's another grocery chain that's going to want to go in and restock those shelves? I think you know the answer to that. And so the point he's making is that this constant comment about it's just property. Yeah, but it has real serious implications. And he said if it were that just property would be bad enough. And the point he makes is government exists to protect property. That is what they're there for. Life, liberty, and property, each of which is bound up in the other two. Property is the basis of liberty, and security in one's property is a prerequisite of a decent society. Attacks on property are attacks on civil rights. He then goes on to say property is necessary for the exercise of civil rights. Civil rights without property rights is a rhetoric, not a reality. The freedom of press enjoyed, he says, by the New York Times is not worth 2 cents without the hundreds of millions of dollars in printing facilities, digital infrastructure that the newspaper relies on to actually disseminate the news. Burning that down would not just be just property damage. If you can see that, but cannot also see how looting a business involves more than just property, then you should, as he says, go to some quiet place and think about it for a while and pray fervently to whatever deity he says you believe in to reach down into the transcendent celestial realm and make you less stupid. He then goes on, of course, attacking in our NPR because of the comments about just property and even the idea of in defense of looting, and points out that the NPR Foundation holds $342 million in assets. It has on-air talent. It has property. The NPR's headquarters in North Capitol Street in Washington, D.C. is just property, too. But would that be defensible in tearing it down? And the point he's making, which I think is very good, and that is we have too many cavalier comments about, well, nobody was killed. First of all, a lot of people have been killed in these riots. It was just property. But again, look at the impact that just property mindset has in terms of the threat to life, the danger to innocent bystanders, firefighters, emergency workers, the potential for food deserts in the future because grocery stores aren't going to want to invest. There's a lot of consequences. That's why that's our first article. I thought we would talk about it. Let's take a break.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Recently, one of my guests on my radio program told me about a poll that discovered that words like safety and security were being frequently mentioned as a reason to vote for a particular candidate. Key issues in any political campaign include the economy and social issues. Now the word security surfaced in many political polls. Mark Lauder believes the election will come down to this word security in three different ways. First is economic security. Donald Trump opposed NAFTA and TPP, while Joe Biden supported those treaties. President Trump has cut taxes, while former Vice President Biden proposed programs that the tax foundation estimated would cost about $4 trillion over 10 years. Domestic security has also become a big issue. Every night, it seems, we see more images of American cities burning as rioters and looters destroy property and attack police and average citizens. Most of these cities are run by Democrats. Many of the police departments are run by competent black police chiefs, but the riots and property damage continue. Speakers at the Democratic National Convention ignored the violence and property destruction. Many of the speakers at the Republican National Convention noted the riots and looting. The two parties almost seem to come down on different sides. Security from foreign enemies is the third factor. President Trump has pushed to rebuild the military, along with striving to end America's involvement in what he has called senseless wars. Democratic leaders want to reduce military spending. Senator Bernie Sanders has put forth a proposal that would reduce Pentagon spending by $74 billion. The Democratic Party platform also calls for ending what it calls forever wars. Security seems to be an important election issue. As you can see, there are striking differences between the candidates and parties on security issues. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's, if we can, give a shout out to those on the Alabama football team. And that is because yesterday, if you have not paid attention to that, Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide football players and coaches marched, actually, I guess it was on Monday, I take that back, against racism and social injustice. And what I thought was so interesting is that some went actually in front of the schoolhouse door at Foster Auditorium. And for those of us that are old enough to remember, and I recognize that I'm kind of the old guy around the table, and so a lot of you are younger and maybe only read about it in history books or maybe saw it on Forrest Gump. That is where the Alabama governor at that time, George Wallace, blocked black students from enrolling in the University of Alabama back in 1963. So, if nothing else, one of the running backs said, being here today is a huge step, but I ask you, what's next? That, I think, is a good question. For certain, we can't let this momentum die. This has to be an ongoing movement until change happens. And one of the concerns, and that brings me to the next article that we're going to be talking about today, is that a very legitimate protest asking for very significant police reform was hijacked by a number of rioters, including Black Lives Matter movement. I want to make a distinction, as we try so often to do. That's why I wanted to use the Nick Saban and Crimson Tide football players to say it's one thing to call for racial justice, social issues, to actually try to bring about police reform. And that is different from those who want to hijack it and use it to transform the country or implement some of the ideas we're going to talk about in just a minute. And so this, I think, is one of the key issues that we're going to have to pay attention to more every single day. And it brings me to our second article by Mike Gonzalez that came from City Journal, because he points out that the protests that sprang up in the wake of George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis seemed like a spontaneous outpouring of grief and anger. Of course, in some ways they were, but they weren't entirely, he says, though many who joined their ranks may have been moved by outrage at the images of George Floyd's death. Those operating behind the scenes have prepared for this moment for a long time. And so now this article, which goes into it in such detail, I'm not going to read all 4 pages of it, don't plan to, but want you to take the time to do so. It points out the fact that the leaders of the Black Lives Matter organizations fueled this summer's disturbances, but they're actually self-described trained Marxist revolutionaries who've long used the plight of black Americans as a justification for overthrowing America's constitutional order. And a little bit later down in the article, again, Mike Gonzalez says that who initiated this demand for change? After the initial protest following George Floyd's death, public outrage was channeled by trained activists working from a playbook. And the Black Lives Matters Global Network and the Movement for Black Lives organizations have been the nerve center for many of these protests, and they've been laying the groundwork for many years, cultivating a network of groups that could organize protests when the moment came and amplify the message through social media. Lest you have any doubts, remember yesterday when I was talking to you about the fact that when the Attorney General accompanied President Trump, and the Attorney General would be Bill Barr, he pointed out in the news conference a number which didn't surprise me, but maybe was shocking for some of the press that was there, who, by the way, didn't do a very good job of reporting it, that of the 170 arrests at Kenosha, Wisconsin, 100 of them were from people out of state who were brought in specifically to do that. And so as a result, you have to, if you want to be a discerning Christian, go back and look at the lives of some of these individuals, because after all, these leaders themselves actually have been pretty honest about what they wanted to do. One of them is Melina Abdullah, who is the Black Lives Matter Los Angeles chapter head, who told an interview that the demonstrations in that city had been strategically planned. She says, we built a kind of organizing strategy that said, build black community to disrupt white supremacy. By the way, I'm going to come back to her in just a minute when we talk about some of the occult connections in just a minute. But also, in an interview that we've talked about before, documented in multiple articles, Patricia Cullors, who is one of the 3 founders, said that she and also one of her other founders, Garza herself, actually are described as trained Marxists. So Alicia Garza and Patricia Cullors call themselves trained Marxists. I just mentioned Melinda Abdullah, who actually is with the Los Angeles Black Lives Matter chapter, and she was born, as they said in one of the articles, as a red diaper baby. Now, if you're not familiar with that, that's the idea raised by communist activist parents. She said was raised in the 1970s on the picket lines of Oakland by activist parents. As a matter of fact, her paternal grandfather was actually a member of the German Communist Party. So we have lots of documentation that has existed in numerous articles, many of which we've already posted, on some of the connection, obviously, to the movement, Black Lives Matter movement, to Marxism. And this particular article, which I've posted for you, is something that you can certainly look at as well. But one of the guests that we've had on this program, and we're going to have him on again in just about a week and a half, is Michael Brown. Now, as I've pointed out before, Michael Brown, I even mentioned in one of the columns, has the same name as Michael Brown, who is the individual who was killed in Ferguson. And you might remember that when Michael Brown wrote the piece that we posted, this is the August 12th commentary by me, but you can go down and certainly find that as an individual that has the same name, he was encouraged to actually sign up for some of these alerts, these Google alerts, which means that every time something mentions Michael Brown, whether it's the Michael Brown, the Christian who's been on the program, or the Michael Brown who was killed in Ferguson, he sees the article. And the thing that so disturbs him time and time again is that when he sees anywhere from 4 to 5 articles a day that mention Michael Brown, almost without exception, they mention hands up, don't shoot. Now, if you've ever been to one of these protests, you know that the phrase that's used all the time is hands up, don't shoot. And that is what Larry Elder in his PragerU video calls the Ferguson lie, or what Michael Brown has referred to as the Ferguson lie that will not die, because there is no evidence that that actually took place, no evidence that those were his last words, no evidence that he was shot on the back. And if you have even the slightest bit of question about that, you can either go to my commentary on August 12th, you can go to PragerU and see the video by Larry Elder, which takes place about 5 minutes. You can read the article by Michael Brown or a variety of others. Matter of fact, you can even go back and look at some of the testimony that actually occurred at the time at the federal, state, and local levels on that issue. And so Michael Brown has been really at the forefront of talking about some of the misinformation, that's a nice word for it, of the issue. But more recently, he's also been pointing out in the latest Stream article that many of the leaders of Black Lives Matter are engaging in a kind of, quote, spirituality, which actually causes them to want to contact those people and the dead. And again, he talks about the fact that we can trace, as he said, this demonic influence one step further with an open, unapologetic statement by these two BLM leaders, the ones I just mentioned. That would be Patricia Cullors and Melinda Abdullah, who then talk about these issues. There are videos available to it. And of course, Abraham Hamilton has been on this program with us before and has done this on one of his programs on American Family Radio on August 13th. You can begin to see the, if you will, almost the occult kind of connection that some of these leaders are engaged in. And so this is just one more example of the fact that if we're going to have some level of discernment, we need to make a really strong distinction between the phrase Black Lives Matter, which is true, and the Black Lives Matter movement, which we now can easily document in terms of its Marxist influence and even some of the desire to call up the spirits of the dead. So a number of very key articles that we wanted to make available to you, but when we come back from the break, we're going to spend some time looking at how has this pandemic and how has this whole lockdown affected various nonprofit organizations. How is it affecting your church? How is it affecting some of these nonprofit groups? How is it affecting Christian organizations? And most importantly, how is it affecting your church? So we're going to get into those issues. Paul Martin's going to be with us. We'll talk about charitable giving in the wake of COVID-19. And we've posted an article for you to read, which I think you might find helpful. It's an article that appeared in the National Religious Broadcasting website. And then we will get into some of the other conversations in the next hour with Michael Knowles of Michael Knowles Show, and even the whole question of Dorothy Sayers and C.S. Lewis. We have a lot to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Here's a question for you. How has the pandemic and the lockdown affected various nonprofits and charitable giving? One of the things I wrote about early last month was an article that Viewpoints commentary that came out August 6th. And that really tried to get a sense on whether or not some of these nonprofits would shut their doors. Some estimate it could be just maybe 11%, which is a sad commentary, but a lot less than the one more dire scenario of 38%. But if you go and ask individuals that work in various nonprofit organizations and various charitable organizations, it seems like things have worked very well. And there is a new study that has come out which actually says that the overwhelming majority of donors don't expect COVID-19 to curtail their charitable giving for the rest of this year. So we wanted to try to get some perspective on that. So we bring to the microphone Paul Martin, senior partner of Dickerson Baker, which is the one that actually did this report, Charitable Giving in the Wake of COVID-19. He is an individual that has a radio and television degree and has worked at KLTY, Christian Book Broadcasting Network, and a number of others, and was awarded the Scott Campbell Industry Achievement Award and the National Center for Stewardship and Generosity Lifetime Stewardship Achievement Award for all the work he's done over the years, and joins us now by phone. So, Paul, great to have you on Point of View.
Kerby, thank you so much. Good to speak with you again.
Well, yes, we used to cross paths all the time, but if nothing else, even now we don't even cross paths with people who live in the same city because of COVID-19. But nevertheless,
that's exactly right.
We have posted one article that appeared in the National Religious Broadcasters website. You perhaps have some others, but it has a nice link to the report on charitable giving in the wake of COVID-19. So tell us about the report, the number of people that you surveyed, and what you found.
Well, let me take a step back and talk a little bit about the reason for the study. You laid out some of it in the preamble a few moments ago, but we at Dickerson Baker work with a lot of nonprofits, and specifically faith-based nonprofits, rescue missions, those people who will work with the homeless to give them a new life, and global missions agencies that are carrying the gospel around the world, and higher ed institutions who are training our next generation, radio stations, many of the stations that we're talking through right now. We just have a lot of people that we believe are so well served by the ministries we serve. We wanted to make certain that there would be continuity of service throughout the year. And we started getting some of these leaders at nonprofits calling us saying, I normally don't receive a large gift from this individual until November or December, but I got it in March. Is that all I'll see from them this year? And if so, that means I've got to hold some back. But if not, there's a lot going on with COVID, and I've got to be able to help people through the pandemic. So we needed to understand, would there be continuity of giving through the rest of the year so the continuity of service could continue at these ministries? So that became our motivator underneath it, is continuity of ministry.
Well, and I think you've got a good point there, because some of them are strapped like never before, and that would be certainly these rescue ministries. And you have some, let me pick one that I have a heart for, the crisis pregnancy centers and pregnancy resource centers that are always kind of living where almost all of them are overworked and underfunded. And so you begin to wonder, what does the future hold? And of course, nobody has a perfect perspective on that. We're not expecting this to be a crystal ball. But it seems to me that what you found from your survey actually bodes well for the future of charitable giving. What did you find?
Well, it really does. We asked the larger donors, those give $1,000 or more per year in the last 2 years, what was going to happen this fall with their giving. And frankly, we were blown away. 60% of the donors are saying that they're going to stay the same as last year. But ready for this, another 25% said, we're going to increase. We see the need. We see an opportunity for the gospel to go out, and we're going to stand up and we're going to get provide the funding for these ministries to do the great work they do.
And
so that means
I'm seeing
85%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 85% of major and mid-level donors are going to give more this year.
That is just amazing numbers. So they're either going to give more or the same, and in either case, that's good news, because I guarantee you, if we had done this interview back in July before you did this survey, we would go, I don't know about this. And so, again, this is one of those opportunities. And I think there's a couple reasons for it. First of all, you've already, of course, pointed out the fact that if you are wanting to reach out to people that are affected by the pandemic, we've had a lot of features on this program of individuals that are reaching out, not just in this country, but overseas. I mean, here, the lockdowns, first of all, the pandemic and the lockdowns have been an inconvenience, sometimes a minor tragedy. For others, it's life-threatening overseas. So I think some people recognize how dangerous that is. But there's something else. We're using media right now, and I've found that a number of media ministries have said we're actually doing better, because I think some people are seeing something we just talked about here, just a unwillingness to even tell the truth about some of these riots, and looking even more so for people that are trusted sources of news, information, and commentary.
That's right. It's amazing. One of the things we discovered when we started interviewing the donors, because if you ever have a question, just go ask the person. And we talked with donors in 44 states, plus the District of Columbia. So it was in regions where lockdowns were ending, lockdowns were restarting. So there was a lot of flux going on with all this, and a lot of commotion. And as a result, we wanted to know what the donor's heart was. And once again, we were absolutely blown away. These donors see both the spiritual and physical needs that are going on in the marketplace, and they plan to maintain or grow support, specifically of evangelism, discipleship. These are things that they are just remarkably involved with. They want to meet the needs of the vulnerable and the disadvantaged people here at home, but they also want to work with international relief and development. Those were the top three areas. Outreach and the Great Commission, for lack of a better term, was number one. Number two, meeting the needs of the vulnerable folks here in the U.S. Then number three was international relief and development. Those are the top three things that donors are saying we're either going to be already behind or we're going to expand our work in those areas.
You know, one of the things, Paul, that some people might be thinking is, okay, that's 85%. What about the others? And even there, not too bad, because when we look at this, you find that some people in that category, like 1 in 6, expect maybe to give less, and fewer than 1 in 20 anticipate a substantial drop in their giving. And I suspect those might be people that have actually lost their job. But even the negative is somewhat positive, because it's such a small number, and most say, well, I might give a little less, but I'm still going to do what I can to continue to support these ministries, which shows a level of donor loyalty that I don't think most people actually understand.
Now, this is faith-based donors. These are people who have a Christian commitment behind them. We have noted that donors to arts organizations, animal organizations, stuff like that. Those organizations are a lot more troubled.
Yes.
In fact, our survey even showed that. But for those that are carrying forth the gospel and doing it boldly, I believe we have a great opportunity for growth this year, because people see that this pandemic is causing a lot of pain and gives people the opportunity to be able to receive Christ. You were talking about the specific issues behind the donors. The donors' reasons for giving less, 6% of the donors that we talked with, their household income had declined.
Right.
However, almost 10% said their income had increased. Their financial situation was actually better in 2020 than it was in 2019. So although we see a lot of doom and gloom, because that makes a good news story on television news, it doesn't necessarily tell you the whole story. And the whole story is a lot more people are doing well this year than are doing poorly. But we really care for the people who are having a tough go of it.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Paul Martin for just a few more minutes. If you'd like to know more, of course, this has a link to charitable giving in the wake of COVID-19. We also, of course, have a link to Dickerson Baker in case you'd like to know more. But we'd also wanted to maybe talk about what if you are with an organization. Maybe you're with a Christian organization, maybe your church, whatever it might be, nonprofit. Are there certain things that would be more effective in terms of raising those funds for you to do this ministry that God has called you for? So we'll talk about some of those events and activities right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have Paul Martin with us, who is again with Dickerson Baker, and we have information about this charitable giving in the wake of COVID-19. And Paul, I thought just for a minute, we might, if we can, talk about some of these big events. Tomorrow, I'll have Penna Dexter in studio. I know you know her, and Kelly Shackelford.
Oh, yeah.
And Kelly, I know, had an event that was supposed to take place in spring, and he decided to move it to the fall. So that's kind of a big in-person event. I know Point of View's talking about doing one later in the fall with Dinesh D'Souza. But you've done some surveys, and there's a fair number of individuals that are kind of what you might call major donors that say they really aren't looking forward to attending an in-person event. What'd you find?
Well, Kerby, you nailed it. We've discovered that people want to give. Now the question is, how do we actually approach them right now? And so we ask these donors, and once again, they're donors who have given $1,000 or more to a single charity in one of the past 2 years. And so one of the ways that that nonprofits raise money is a weekend fundraiser at a resort or conference center for these large donors. And we would highly recommend that people maybe hold on that. It's going to be really hard to get people to go. We're seeing that about 52% will not be excited about going to that event just yet. 42% of those are going to wait for a vaccine before they get in a room with a lot of people at a resort or conference center. A fundraising gala or a banquet like Kelly does, or like Point of View is considering, about a third of the donors are telling us, let's not do that. We're not going to come to that just yet. Let's wait till the vaccine is out and people are touched, and we have a lower capacity of lower likelihood of getting it. Now, part of the reason for this is that people, typically donors of this size, are typically a little bit more mature. And so they're going to be a little bit more concerned about the health issues. And we can actually talk about what they're concerned about as well. But the fundraising banquet or gala, that's probably not a good one. But let me tell you what is a good way to talk about things with donors.
Yes.
The best is always one-on-one, where a representative from the ministry speaks with the donor. That is individual. It's called individual cultivation. It's an individual time with the donor where they cultivate a relationship. That is going to always be the best, and especially if you're able to meet at a safe place and you go over what are the precautions that you're taking. The other one that's good is a small group gathering to discuss the project, but there's kind of a footnote on this one. People are ready to do that as well. And so if you wanted to gather a small group, say for a dinner or something else, that's good, but they're still very interested in safety, and they don't want to host it at their house. It appears that the home is the safe place, and they really don't want to invite people that they may not know, and they may not know who all they connect with, into their home. So the larger the event, the harder it's going to be to get people to show up. But if you're on one-on-one meetings, there's a lot of people who will meet with you right now.
And I wondered if maybe using this new technology, do a both and. For example, I teach a Sunday school class right now in the chapel, and 2/3 of the people are in the room and 1/3 are on Zoom. Yesterday, I was going through a teacher training because we're going to be working our way through a teaching program. And as I went on Zoom, I realized actually I was zooming in on a group that was actually in that room. So it does seem to me that you could have something that could be in someone's home or a church or a hotel in which people that felt comfortable could come, especially with social distancing, and others then could log in through the Zoom call or something like that. And you might be able to do a both and, because we're starting to see that happen a lot in the churches, aren't we?
We sure are. My church here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area is, we still have not gotten into a room together. Okay, now we're an older congregation. We've got a little bit more concerns because of the way the building is built. And by the way, we started a construction project while all this is going on. So dust in the air, and there's something about social shaming when you sneeze that we really didn't want to put our members through.
You got that.
So,
yeah.
And so as a result, we're kind of delaying that for a lot of those reasons. Having said that, our video ministry has been remarkable. And frankly, giving as well has been good and solid during this time as well. For those people who will reach out and actually touch and motivate donors, you will have an opportunity to be able to share your vision and be able to have that vision funded.
Just before I let you go, let's talk about what is available through Dickerson Baker, because some people might say, okay, I'd kind of like to see that report, and we do have a link there, but they could get it from you. But also they might just say, you know, we are trying to raise funds for this ministry that God has called us to, and we're not real good at this, and we certainly could benefit from some people that know a lot more about it. So how can people connect up to you and what might be available if somebody needed some of those resources.
Fantastic. We would love to speak with them, and if they'd like to speak with me, I'd be more than happy. Just ask for me specifically. Go to our website, Dickerson Baker, and Baker's got 2 Ks, so it's a little different, dickersonbaker.com, and you can download the report and just request that you'd like to speak with me. Be happy to do that. What we can help people do is help be able to fund that vision, and we do it through individual donor work, we do it through group donor work, we do it through messaging and some direct mail, though we're a little lighter on that. We prefer people going face-to-face and sharing the story and getting people involved. So we can help people in that way, is to fund their vision.
Well, Paul, it's always great to hear your voice. It's always great to run into you, and I appreciate you giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Kirby, what a pleasure. Look forward to speaking with you again soon.
All right. And again, we have a link to Dickerson Baker, so you don't even have to know how to spell it, and it's right there. We have a link to this article, which then will link to the study. And as we're going to a break, let me just mention that some of us raise individual support. I've done both. And I know that some of you out there might be joining staff of, I don't know, be crew or navigators or East-West Ministry or E3 Ministries or whatever it might be. There's another thing that people have started talking about, and it's called front porch fundraising. And that is, you recognize some people say, I really just feel a little uneasy about meeting you even face to face, and say, okay, why don't you just be on the front porch, you be at the front door, and I'll step back a little bit and I'll just share the vision of the calling God has called me to in terms of ministry. And that is another way to think about that. So we don't necessarily always have to fund things through Zoom. I think we're all getting zoomed out, aren't we? And so that was just another thought I'd pass on to you as well. Just before we take a break, first of all, we have posted some of the articles. A Clutch of Fools, that article I talked about earlier, and then one about Black Lives Matter, and some new material and information about some of these founders and what they're engaged in is there for you. The next article, of course, is on charitable giving, and when we come back from the break, Michael Knowles with us. We'll be talking about the Michael Knowles Show. Got some questions for him. And then before the hour is up, next hour, we'll talk about Dorothy Sayers and C.S. Lewis. I thought it'd be good every once in a while just to get away from all the news and information. And then, of course, don't forget that our Friday weekend edition, Penn Extra, Kelly Shackelford will be here. And I know they've got a lot to cover, and we will do our best to cover it with them. And so I'm looking forward to that opportunity as well. My Viewpoints commentary today is on the subject of security. It is something that is surfacing in more and more of these polls and focus groups. And, of course, we talked about it earlier in the week, and I wrote this about a week ago, but gives you some of the facts and figures related to that. So all of that's on our website, pointofview.net, and we'll be back with more right after this.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I've recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Yes, we're going to spend some time talking about Michael Knowles and his show, which I think you will really want to know more about. And then before the hour is up, we'll talk about Dorothy Sayers and C.S. Lewis, a new book out called Dorothy and Jack. I think you really enjoy that conversation as well. If you listen to Point of View any length of time, you know that one of the things I'd like to do for a younger generation is what was never done for me, and that is to provide an opportunity and to promote individuals. And that's why years ago, it was in another studio, we began to do the Millennial Roundtable. And at that time, we had Ali Stuckey and Nick Pitts. Of course, they went on to bigger and better things, I guess, after that. And even to this day, we still have sometimes people sit in this chair, Chelsea Ullman and Jonathan Teague and Shane Pruitt and others doing kind of a Millennial Roundtable. And there was an individual that I've been following for some time and have been so impressed with, Michael Knowles of The Michael Knowles Show. He also is the co-host of Verdict with Ted Cruz. And he's worked with individuals that we've had on the program. For example, I think he worked with the novelist and screenwriter Andrew Klavan. How many times have we quoted Andrew Klavan on this program? About 2 weeks ago, we had Spencer Klavan on. I think they both went to Yale together. And I just thought, we need to get Michael on here. Then I saw that he endorsed one of the books, and I said, well, maybe we can connect up with him. And he joins us now. So, Michael, thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, Kerby, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for having me on.
Want to see what we can do to maybe get a few more people watching your show. Now, I tend to watch it on YouTube, but I'll let people figure out how to do that. It's connected up with the Daily Wire. And I did want to get into a little bit later this hour, or at least half hour, maybe talk about some of the tweets you had about executive orders, which is more political. But I thought we'd start out with some of the fun, because one of the things I've enjoyed that your producer has done for you, and some of your listeners have, is since we've been talking about go woke, go broke, they've been showing some of these woke commercials and then asking you to try to figure out what the product is. Now, you're half my age, so I figured you'd probably be a little more media wise in that regard, but I think you're like 0 for 10 or something like that. And it is just a good illustration of the fact that these people in these major companies put out these woke commercials, and even as media wise as you are, you can't figure out what the product is. Tell us more.
I think it is simply impossible with some of these woke commercials to figure out what the product is, because it really doesn't matter when you're selling a product that is more or less the same across various brands. What you need to do is appeal to customers' sensibilities, sense of identity. And identity in the past might be rooted in other concerns, say religion or culture, and now it's certainly ideological. So most recently, my producer brought in a commercial that a fan had suggested, a listener to the show, and it was a commercial about how women are terribly oppressed. And it showed boardrooms and men, for the exact same behavior, get plaudits and promotions, and women are castigated and they're demeaned. And I watched, I guess, 57 seconds of this, and I had absolutely no idea what the commercial could be. And then at the end, it turned out it was for Pantene Pro V. It was for shampoo. Last I checked, men and women both have hair. They both use shampoo. In fact, they both use Pantene Pro V. But of course, when you talk about a shampoo like that, I mean, all of these shampoos are basically the same. So what you have to do is appeal to this sense of identity. And I think right now, it would appear that people take this leftist sensibility, this ideology, so to heart that it has become a substitute religion and a substitute identity. And I don't know if it's left their hair any better off, but it has constituted heaven.
By the way, they always talk about what great hair you have, although I don't think your hair on Rachel Maddow looked that good. So you can see I follow you on Twitter, too. They actually took your hair and switched it with Rachel Maddow, so I don't think MSNBC needs your hair. But nevertheless, just while we're talking about commercials, and I'll get into some serious stuff for just a minute, the other commercial that caught me, and since you're kind of classically trained, and we've had Spencer Clavin on here as well, talking about the American mind and others, there was one where it starts out with narcissism and narcissist, and you're thinking, okay, so this is going to be trying to criticize individuals that are too fixated on their looks and on their body, and you're trying to figure this out, and you're taking it one direction, and all of a sudden it takes a sharp left turn, and basically it's a commercial for a fitness center, which is where people tend to oftentimes look in the mirror and see how they look. And I thought everything you've said for the last 40 seconds really contradicts your punchline, wouldn't you think?
Right. Well, this commercial, I remember now, is for the Equinox Fitness Center.
Yes.
And so this build-up it would seem to be this ironic play of narcissism. I don't think anybody has a positive view of narcissism, or at least they didn't until very recently. But then of course, the punchline is about self-love and self-obsession. And that is very prominent throughout society. I think the problem is actually even bigger than the left. I mean, the left is pushing this in explicit terms and talking about how we need to love ourselves and do everything basically to just gratify our own appetites and desires, and even our relationships are really just means to our own gratification. They push that too. But there has been a version of this on the right as well. So you have not only the self-indulgence of the 1960s, say, free love movement of the hippies, but you have a little bit of self-indulgence, say, in the 1980s, or, the people who lionize Ayn Rand, or selfishness, or greed is good, who watch the Wall Street movies and they take them earnestly. They say this is a model to follow. And so the problem has become really pervasive in society. And most clearly you see this in the decline of religion. And as people stop going to church, and as people stop taking faith seriously, or really anything outside of themselves seriously, you see a culture that becomes almost, you might say, solipsistic. All it sees is itself, and it turns out that a man wrapped up in himself makes a small package indeed.
Yes, for sure. Just before I take a break, let me just mention that one of the things we've done is have a link to, I guess it's the one that you did just recently on lies and statistics and how some of the liberal elites are doubling down on white guilt. Also, didn't I see the Speaker of the House actually get her hair done in a salon and then blame those who were taking the pictures for it? Those are some things that you talk about in that particular episode, which I think was yesterday's episode. And so we have a link so that people can follow you. And as you can tell, I'm kind of a fan, but talk about how they can find you on the Daily Wire. And then when we come back, we'll talk about some of the executive orders of Donald Trump.
Absolutely. You can find the shows on the Daily Wire. I really appreciate your listening to it and showing where the show can be found. You can get it everywhere, though. We go to the audience, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify. Big Tech hasn't totally censored us yet. You can find us there, and then at Twitter at Michael J. Knowles.
So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, you know that I have been very critical of some of the executive orders under Barack Obama, and, of course, even now, to be fair, under Donald Trump. But Michael's got a good point, and the more I read it, I thought, even though he got criticized, the point is this bureaucracy is huge, and do we have any kind of checks and balances? So given the fact he was pilloried a little bit in some of his posts and some of the comments he made, I think it was compelling, and I wanted you to hear it, and we'll go back and forth on that a little bit, and once again, just talk about the fact that we have a government that in many cases has been out of control. It's sometimes called the swamp, but how do we deal with that, and what will the next president, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, actually be able to do, and what would be the difference in the two candidates? We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Recently, one of my guests on my radio program told me about a poll that discovered that words like safety and security were being frequently mentioned as a reason to vote for a particular candidate. Key issues in any political campaign include the economy and social issues. Now the word security surfaced in many political polls. Mark Lauder believes the election will come down to this word security in 3 different ways. First is economic security. Donald Trump opposed NAFTA and TPP, while Joe Biden supported those treaties. President Trump has cut taxes, while former Vice President Biden proposed programs that the Tax Foundation estimated would cost about $4 trillion over 10 years. Domestic security has also become a big issue. Every night, it seems, we see more images of American cities burning as rioters and looters destroy property and attack police and average citizens. Most of these cities are run by Democrats. Many of the police departments are run by competent black police chiefs, but the riots and property damage continue. Speakers at the Democratic National Convention ignored the violence and property destruction. Many of the speakers at the Republican National Convention noted the riots and looting. The 2 parties almost seem to come down on different sides. Security from foreign enemies is a third factor. President Trump has pushed to rebuild the military, along with striving to end America's involvement in what he has called senseless wars. Democratic leaders want to reduce military spending. Senator Bernie Sanders has put forth a proposal that would reduce Pentagon spending by $74 billion. The Democratic Party platform also calls for ending what it calls forever wars. Security seems to be an important election issue. As you can see, there are striking differences between the candidates and parties on security issues. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Michael Knowles with us for a few more minutes. And again, we're talking about the fact that he has a host of the show, The Michael Knowles Show. It's on Daily Wire. We have a link to michaeljknowles.com, also a link to his most recent episode, so you can follow it there. But, Michael, maybe you can teach old dogs new tricks. And that is, I've always said that these executive orders, which were completely misused by Barack Obama, eventually might get misused by Donald Trump. But you, the other day, made a case, and I think it's pretty compelling, that who else is going to control this massive bureaucracy? We have all sorts of unelected bureaucrats making all sorts of decisions independently of the president. And as a result, oftentimes this sitting government just keeps on going and says, well, if you're only going to be there 4 or 8 years, we'll just keep doing what we want to do. And the only way to rein that in, other than to have Congress do what Congress seemingly does not want to do, is to have the executive branch write some of those executive orders. So talk about the argument that you've been making lately.
Exactly. This is the problem. Under a constitutional system, the use of executive orders should be very limited. But not only should it be limited, it should be relatively ineffective, right? Because the agencies of the executive branch would not have very much power. And so we're not even relying on the benevolence of our elected president. Here, we're relying on the strength of our constitutional system. The trouble is that is no longer how our laws are made. Under the Constitution, the Congress is supposed to make the laws, but that is not what actually happens. What actually happens is that virtually all of the laws that actually govern us are made by the executive agencies. And sometimes you'll get some massive omnibus bill passed by Congress, but even then it gives huge deference over to the administrative agencies. And even if the courts were to challenge that, you have judicial precedent that allows the agencies more or less to write their own rules for how they write these sorts of laws. And so we're in a situation that began really with Woodrow Wilson in earnest,
right.
the first serious left-wing progressive president, though he did learn some lessons, I'm sorry to say, as a Republican, from Teddy Roosevelt. And he crafted the administrative state, which has also been called the swamp or the bureaucracy or the deep state. And this was, in his own words, this was imported from Europe. This was not an American concept. He said, basically, the Constitution is outdated. We need to get rid of it. It's not fit for this new understanding of human nature and society. So he creates it as the architect. FDR really implements it and establishes what we would call the administrative state or the deep state. And this expands dramatically in the 1960s, where we are now at the point today where the EPA or the FDA or the CDC or any other of those alphabet agencies has much more power to create laws than any of our elected legislators. And so when you see an executive order, what that means is that our elected president is trying to exert some control over the agencies. Now, I am not saying that this is the ideal mode of government. However, it is a sort of irony today that executive orders, far from being anti-democratic or anti-constitutional, are actually one of the few democratic and constitutional means that we still have, as we the people, of exerting some control over our government.
Well, and again, part of that has to do with Congress. Let's just take the Affordable Care Act, oftentimes called Obamacare. We've had Louis Gohmert in here, and we've had a variety of other individuals who actually took the time to read it. And I printed it out and took the time and survived the reading of it. And I was struck by the number of times, Michael, I saw, as the Secretary of Health and Human Services shall determine. And so you have this almost decision on the part of many members of Congress to turn over almost all of the lawmaking to a body that's not supposed to make laws in the first place. True?
Precisely. And so when we criticize President Trump for the executive orders, I understand it. We're expressing a frustration with how our system is actually run right now. But it's simply the case that without the executive orders, no president really could exert much control over the government. So I think there's obviously a procedural issue that we have, which is we'd like our Congress to make laws instead of, some bureaucrat who's completely unaccountable at HHS. However, there's also a matter of substance, which is that not all executive orders are created the same. And when Barack Obama writes executive orders that he himself acknowledges are unconstitutional, for instance, executive amnesty, that's a very different thing than President Trump going in and, for instance, repealing a rule from Housing and Urban Development that was a major federal power grab in the suburbs, which he just recently did. Those are different things, and I think conservatives should have a little bit of nuance and treat not just the procedure of the executive order, but also the substance. What is really being ruled here?
Again, Michael Knowles with us. And again, we have a link to the Facebook page, Twitter page, website. Of course, you can go to PragerU and see the book club and a number of other things. But I thought just before we go, one of the things you did talk about this week was the issue of mail-in ballots. And you've had the privilege of sitting across from the Attorney General, Bill Barr. Tomorrow, I'm going to have Kelly Shackelford, who spent time with him as well. And Bill Barr, the Attorney General, has been very concerned about and even expressed the concerns yesterday on CNN and also in other venues about these mail-in ballots. And I think we have some very good examples, Michael, of a city council race in the third largest city in New Jersey, Paterson, that actually had to have a mulligan and do it all over again. And we have a good example in the 12th congressional race in New York, which took 2 months and really was never resolved. You just finally had a judge, kind of like King Solomon's, having to bring down a sword and say, well, your incumbent is going to be the winner. And if those give us any indication at all of the kind of insanity that can unfold on the night of November 3rd, I think we've got a real problem or even a potential constitutional crisis. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are absolutely you've got it right, but I'd like to be even more pessimistic, if that's possible, which is I think we are already headed inevitably for that constitutional crisis. Attorney General Barr did a great job explaining the issues of voter fraud. The left always denies that voter fraud exists when it suits their purposes. That's why they oppose voter ID and other measures to secure the ballot. But we have the specific examples, and then when you point them out, they say to you, oh, well, those are just individual cases. There's no evidence that this occurs at a wide scale. But as the Attorney General points out, we've never tried widespread mail-in ballots. We have very specific absentee ballots that are requested and go to specific people, but we've never tried anything like this. It is certainly going to end in disaster, not only because you've got 80 to 100 million people expected to vote by mail, which will result in the loss of ballots and the seizure of ballots by people who are harvesting them, but also because you're not going to know what's happening on election night.
That's true.
And so the left has already floated, as they said, it could be a red mirage that it looks as though President Trump wins, and then several weeks later he will lose. And so either way you cut it, I mean, even if everything were to work perfectly, which obviously it will not, you're headed toward a constitutional crisis. And you're getting not so implicit threats from Democrats now. Hillary Clinton says that Joe Biden should not concede the election under any circumstances. And so you're in this very precarious situation. And unfortunately, it appears they've backed us into a corner here. We're damned if we do, and we're damned if we don't.
Yep. And again, as we've pointed out before, and we'll talk about that tomorrow with Kelly Shackelford and some others, there are people that are actually saying, yes, you might have a red belief. You might think Donald Trump won November 3rd. And then, of course, I don't think we're going to have any kind of decision that night. Those of us that are old enough remember we usually knew that night who won. We might be weeks or months later, and then who knows, because somewhere along the line you have to have someone act in terms of the Electoral College in December. And if not, of course, there's a federal law that says if we can't decide who should be in office January 20th, then it goes to the Speaker of the House. And to use a biblical phrase, I think that changes your countenance a little bit in terms of what that might look like. So anyway, Michael, I wanted to, on our program where we have about 260, 70 stations in 42 states, I wanted a lot of those people to start tuning in to you. So if this gives you a little bit of bump in the Michael Knowles Show, thank you so very much for giving us some time, and I hope you come back again.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Kerby.
We're going to take a break, and then when we come back, we'll change our conversation, and we'll talk about Dorothy Sayers and C.S. Lewis. And I thought it'd be just a good way to kind of wind down all the politics that we seem to talk about every single day. So we're going to be talking with Gina Dalfonzo about this book, and it might be something that you would enjoy, not only in terms of understanding the friendship and the literary abilities, but even some of the apologetics that we talk about so often here on Point of View. So first of all, you can find information about Michael on the website, pointofview.net. We have my Viewpoints commentary today on the subject of security, and if you haven't had a chance to read that, I would encourage you to do so, because I do believe that one of the key words that's going to surface through this next couple of weeks is going to be security. Security in terms of economic security, domestic security in terms of the riots and looting that has taken place, and even security from foreign invaders and enemies because of some of the issues there as well, which maybe won't be as much in front and center, but have been in the past. So just another topic to address, and it's all on our website, pointofview.net. We'll come back and talk about Dorothy Sayers and C.S. Lewis right after this.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
New book out entitled Dorothy and Jack. Dorothy Sayers and C.S. Lewis, the transforming friendship of the two. And I think you will certainly enjoy this. It is available both in paperback and Kindle. We have a link to it on our website. It is written by Gina Dalfonzo, who is also the author of One by One, a columnist as well at the Christ and Popular Culture, and also the founder and editor of Dickens blog. She also has a bachelor's degree in English from Messiah College, also a master's degree in English from George Mason University, was a recipient of the Clyde S. Kilby Research Grant, and she joins us now by phone. So, Gina, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, I live in two different worlds in some respects, because when I do apologetics, people always are quoting from C.S. Lewis and things like that. But I've hardly ever heard anybody in my apologetic circle ever mention Dorothy Sayers. But then since I sat on the board of a particular group of individuals and a school that teaches classical Christian education, we spend much of our time talking about Dorothy Sayers, and only occasionally do you get a mention of C.S. Lewis. So it sort of brings us all together. But take us back to the 1990s when you decided to sign up for a course. What was it called? I think Theology and Oxford Christian Writers, in which you said, I only knew a little bit about one and not the other, but that then ended up in this book, didn't it?
Yes, that's correct. I was at Messiah College. I signed up for this course. I had just started reading Lewis when I was in high school, Screw Tape, Mere Christianity, some of those. And as for his friends, associates, fellow Christian writers, I didn't know much about them yet at all. I hadn't read Tolkien yet. I hadn't read Chesterton, and I hadn't read Sayers. So all these writers and more were covered in this course, and we just sort of dove headfirst into this world that I didn't know very well yet, and I was just enthralled and loved it and learned so much about all these writers. And Sayers and Lewis became the favorites out of that and have been two of my very favorite writers for a long time now.
And I might just mention this book just came out last month, but you should be able to find it in a local bookstore. But if not, we have it in paperback and Kindle. You know, you talk about the fact that in some respects they were very similar individuals, both very intelligent, perceptive, both attended Oxford. They went through a time of spiritual rebellion, although a little bit different. So in some respects they were very similar. But then you also then immediately talk about how they could be very different. He lost his mother early and had a troubled relationship with his father. She had parents that she was very close to most of her life. Her marriage was very strained. His marriage, though fairly short, was very happy. He was generally a contented spirit. Hers was kind of boisterous. So it's interesting that this developed in large part from, I believe, a fan letter that this novelist, Dorothy Sayers, wrote to C.S. Lewis as he was sort of becoming a rising star. Tell us more if you might.
That's right. They first came in contact in the early 1940s. She was very famous by then, having written the Lord Peter Wimsey detective novels. Those are still what she's best known for. And so she was a well-known name. He was not. He was just starting to be known as a writer. But she read something that he wrote. We don't know what it is because this first letter, unfortunately, has been lost. But she sent him a fan letter, and it meant a lot to him, just as any up-and-coming writer will be encouraged when somebody famous praises their work. And so he wrote back. They struck up a correspondence, and from there a friendship grew because they discovered they had a lot of common interests. They were both very well-read, both very interested in theology, just had so many things in common that they like to talk about and explore together.
What about her faith? Most people know a little bit about that. I've had some people say, maybe Anglo-Catholic or something like that, because the Christian element is something that, of course, is very important to our listeners.
Right. She was actually the daughter of a clergyman. Anglican clergymen, considered herself high church Anglican. So, yes, Anglo-Catholic is what she would call herself. She was what we'd call a cradle Christian. You know, she sort of grew up in the faith. In her maybe late 20s, early 30s, she had a little period of sort of, you could call it rebellion, recklessness maybe. I don't think she ever really stopped believing, but she did get a little bit reckless with her behavior, did sort of get away from the faith for a little while, eventually came back and started feeling more settled in it. But yes, she did not actually go through a period of loss of faith like Lewis did, very famously, but she had her ups and downs, spiritually speaking.
Well, for sure. You know, this was a male-female situation, but it was kind of interesting because if I remember right, didn't you say something about neither of them thought that the most important aspect of an individual was their gender? In other words, they were attracted to each other, not so much male-female as in terms of just two incredibly gifted minds. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's exactly right. They were both brilliant, both incredibly articulate, and both of them were always looking for friends with whom they could engage intellectually, regardless of gender. And they lived somewhat far apart, so they kept writing each other letters, and we're incredibly fortunate that they did, because now we have all these wonderful letters to read, and I was able to sort of build the book on that foundation. But yes, it was a very remarkable cross-gender friendship where they both were just looking for fellow intellectuals, fellow Christians, a real meeting of the minds.
Talk about that just for a minute before we take a break, because the letters you had an access to, and that gave you a sense, because today, sadly, maybe you could pull some of these emails out and things like that, but back then, the art of letter writing was very significant, especially when you have two individuals that are very gifted at writing in the first place. So talk about just even the impact that looking at some of those letters had even in your own experience.
Oh, I enjoyed them so much. Going back to when I took that class, and then immediately afterwards, I started looking for their other works to read, and in that process, I picked up copies of her letters, published copies, and published copies of his letters, and so I was sort of able to trace that correspondence in those separate volumes, and their letters are just so wonderful. They're fascinating. They're funny, and they're smart, and sometimes they bicker a little bit, but they just have so many interesting things to say. And I often say I feel sorry for the biographers of the future who, as you said, will have to wade through our emails and texts to try to come up with what we were thinking, because letters like these just they helped me so much. I couldn't have done it without those letters, and they made it just I mean, it was work, of course, but it was a real treat too. It was just fun.
Yes. Just before I take a break, one more point, and that is, as a woman, as you're reading Dorothy Sayers, okay, this is a woman that graduates from Oxford early in the 20th century. That is not something that is always done, and I thought maybe just because, again, as a woman, maybe you can give some perspective to that and what that meant to her and how she maybe had to fight some of the kind of stereotypes that maybe have been placed upon her.
It was an incredible accomplishment because she was one of the first women to graduate from Oxford. She was literally in the first class of women, and it was sort of a retroactive thing. They were allowed to go back and get their diplomas a little bit later on. But, yeah, she loved learning all her life. She was absolutely passionate about it. Oxford meant a great deal to her, that opportunity to go there and study and learn and eventually graduate. And she put some of her experiences into what I think is her best novel, Gaudy Night, about what it was like to be a female college student back in the day, and how they did deal with a lot of discrimination, but they were also just so incredibly excited about the opportunity, and it was just an experience that she looked back on with such appreciation all her life.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation for just a few more minutes with Gina Dalfonzo. And again, the book is entitled Dorothy and Jack. It is published by our friends at Baker Books, and you can possibly find it in your local bookstore, but given the fact that might be somewhat difficult, we have also provided a link for you to get it either in paperback or Kindle. And I think it will really be a fun conversation starter for some of the things that maybe you have been reading over the years of C.S. Lewis or Dorothy Sayers. Maybe you say, I don't even know who these people are, and here you're saying they are really important people, so I need to know a little bit more about them. Again, 7 chapters that kind of takes you through Oxford and World War I and the friendship, the conflict, a number of other things, and we've already kind of dipped into some of the key elements of that. We'll come back and pick out 1 or 2 more real quickly, and if nothing else, I would encourage you to read that and then to read the individuals that we're talking about, because they have left quite a legacy in their own literature. We'll continue our conversation about Dorothy and Jack right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Gina Dalfonzo with us as we talk about Dorothy and Jack, the transforming friendship of Dorothy Sayers and C.S. Lewis. You know, one of the differences between them is that C.S. Lewis actually served in the Great War, the war to end all wars, and of course later was wounded and 2 other men in his unit were killed. Some people have tried to make a lot of that and say that both C.S. Lewis and especially Tolkien, you end up with some some of these crazy movies come out in the last couple of years were pulling together all of these ideas. But I did think it was very interesting that somebody I quoted earlier today, Joseph LeConte, has been on the program many times before, wrote a book called A Hobbit, a Wardrobe, and a Great War. And even later you can look at The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you can kind of get the sense that in many ways, C.S. Lewis, or Jack as he was called, was much more profoundly affected by the war because he was in it, obviously, than Dorothy Sayers. What about that?
Yes, it's true. And by the way, I love LeConte's book. I'm so glad you brought it up. I think it really helps us sort of dive into that experience and what it meant to Lewis. Sayers was affected more indirectly, as you say, simply from the fact of not having been in the war. She was actually in France when hostilities started to break out. She and some friends had vacation there, which was not perhaps the smartest thing they could have done, but they got out of there in a hurry. But like others, she was affected by the war. She tried to help Belgian refugees. She was, of course, very much aware of what was in the news and so forth. And later on, she would deal with a husband who was suffering very much from wartime injuries. Yes. I believe he may have suffered from the after effects of like that. And so she experienced some of these things at second hand, and of course they did affect her too, but as you say, not exactly in the same way.
Right. And of course some of that affected the fact that both of them, from a spiritual or a Christian point of view or religious point of view, were affected in different ways. But eventually they had, of course, their faith. But I thought one other thing that was very interesting, it doesn't necessarily relate to both of them, but it certainly relates to C.S. Lewis. Later on in the book you talk about how the Inklings began to have less of an influence, and I thought we might talk about that for a minute, because in some respects, if it weren't for J.R.R. Tolkien, I don't know where C.S. Lewis would be spiritually. So talk about the influence of some of those individuals that were surrounding Tolkien and Lewis.
Yes, of course, Tolkien was very important to him. As you say, guided him spiritually, helped him find his faith in Christ, was absolutely vital to his spiritual development, his professional development too, and just a very important friend for him to have. And of course, the Inklings as a group who surrounded him, Owen Barfield and some of the others, they all contributed to each other's development as human beings, as writers, as scholars in so many ways. I also mentioned Charles Williams, another Inkling in the book, who was a friend of both Lewis and Sayers, but as I explore a little bit, his influence was kind of maybe not wholly good, because Williams had some occult interests in his life that were not entirely healthy. But yeah, you have to sort of get into the book to look at that part. But the Inklings as a whole were, yes, very influential to Lewis, and I think it was probably very hard on him when the group started to break up a little bit. He stayed friends with all of them, I believe, but the group as a regular group sort of tapered off, and that must have left a great gap in his life. It had meant so much to him, and I think it was great that he had Sayers and other individual friends at that time. Sayers, of course, having so many literary and apologetic and so forth interests in common with him, was able to keep corresponding with him, keep supporting him in the work he was doing. I'm sure that meant a great deal to him.
When, again, you mentioned Charles Williams, who in some respects was kind of a mentor to Dorothy Sayers, especially as related to Dante and things of that nature. So you do mention that. But before we run out of time, Gina, I want to come to you and say, how would you maybe encourage people to read the book, or why should they? What would they gain out of that? Because you have gone from a time when you talked about being a student at Messiah, and you said, well, I've heard of C.S. Lewis, but I've only read Mere Christianity, and I don't even know who Dorothy Sayers is, to writing an entire book on it. So what's the impact that it's had on you, and what kind of impact might it have on some of our listeners?
It's just a story of two very intelligent, very passionate Christians two of the greatest Christian writers of the 20th century, I would go so far as to say, who I honestly think everybody ought to read their works, read about them, learn from them. They just have so much to teach us from the way they thought about their faith, the way they thought through it, their intellectual defenses of it, and just the difference that it made in their lives, shaping their thinking, shaping their imaginations. The story of their friendship is just a wonderful tale of why friendship is so important and how it can help encourage us, support us, and shape us, and why we need friendship so much.
So again, the book is entitled Dorothy and Jack, Transforming Friendship of Dorothy Sayers and C.S. Lewis. Gina's been with us. We have information about the book on the website. There, it is available both in paperback and Kindle, and I would encourage you to find out more. If you go to your local bookstore and want to order it there, it is published by Baker Books and has an endorsement by a number of individuals, some of whom you may have heard of, others that you would need to know about, some whom I consider friends. And that's why I thought the book would be really helpful to you. And in light of all the political stuff we were covering every single day, I thought it would be good in this last half hour to have something that would really feed your soul, feed your mind, and encourage you in your Christian walk. So, Gina, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much.
Again, it is published by Baker. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if not, as always, we've made it very easy for you to order it there as well. Just before we walk out the door here, let me mention a couple of things. First of all, you might say, I'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things you've been covering. You talked with Paul Martin about charitable giving. That link is there, and that article and report is there. We've talked with Michael Knowles. If you might say, well, I want to know more about his program, that is there. Of course, information about this book, Dorothy and Jack, is there. So all of it available to you at pointofview.net. My commentary today, as I've mentioned just a few minutes ago, but let me mention it again, is on the subject of security. Mark Lauder does a very good job, and it also has a link to his original article to say that security is, in a sense, sort of on the ballot. And it's going to show up in three ways. Number one, economic security, about the very significant difference between the two candidates on things like NAFTA and TPP and regulations and taxes and all sorts of things. Number two, in terms of domestic security, the Republican convention talked about the rioting. The Democratic convention didn't. And only recently have we had the former vice president address that issue. And then finally, security from foreign enemies, which gets us into whereas there may be some similarity there because, of course, the Republican National Convention and even President Trump has said he wants to get us out of senseless wars. The Democratic Party platform talked about ending forever wars, but how much funding to the military, that I think is very different as well. So this issue of security is going to be on the ballot. That's why we cover it today in the Viewpoints commentary. Tomorrow will be Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. It is our weekend edition. I think you will benefit from all the great insight that we always get from those two individuals. And so I'm looking forward to that opportunity as well. And so go to the website, pointofview.net. You can find many of the articles we've mentioned today. And I would encourage you to print them out, to pass them on to others, post them on your Facebook page or Twitter feed. Get a conversation going. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.